Come on guys, let's learn Ingress in Kubernetes. So why do we need Ingress in Kubernetes? In previous video, we learned about different types of services, but each service has its own disadvantage. For example, cluster IP allows only internal communication. Node port exposes a service on a fixed port on each node. Load balancer service assigns an external IP, but creates a new load balancer for each service. That is very expensive. And also imagine a scenario where you have multiple services, an API, a front end, and an admin panel. Managing all of them with separate load balancer is not effective, and it is not scalable. Instead, we use Ingress, which acts like a single entry point for traffic, and it will smartly route into different services. These are the reasons we need Ingress. Also, Ingress will provide features like path-based routing, host-based routing, and TLS termination, and other features. So let's go to the hands-on part now. In hands-on part, first we have to create an Ingress controller. To route the traffic to the services, we need an Ingress controller, which manages the Ingress rules. We can use the controllers like Nginx Ingress controllers, AWS ALB controllers, or any other type of controllers. So let's install the controller first. I'm going to use the Nginx controller now. The deployment YAML file will be there in this particular GitHub path, and I'm directly going to run kubectl apply now. Let's run this now. Now Nginx controller is created. Let's verify the Nginx controller is created or not by running kubectl get pods command. You can see one pod status is running and another two is still it is in completed status. Now let's create two services. One is front end service, another one is API service. First, let's create a API deployment YAML file, va API deployment.yaml file. I've added the YAML file content here. I have explained the deployment YAML file in previous session and go and check out previous video for more explanation. Here we have AKMS, API version kind metadata and spec. I'm using HTTP echo image from HashiCorp. When I run this container, I will get a message called as API service and the container port is 5678. Let's save this YAML file now. Let's create the deployment using kubectl apply -f and the file name that is API dep.yaml. The deployment is created now. Let's create the service for API deployment. For that, I can run the command kubectl expose deployment, then the deployment name that is API-deployment. And then the port I'm going to use is 80 and the target port that is nothing but the container port that is 5678. Then the name for the service I can give API-service. Spelling is wrong here, name. Let's run this command now. Now the service is created. If I run kubectl get service, I have the API service now. Also, you can see type is cluster IP because default service is cluster IP service. Let's create the front-end deployment now. va front-end deployment.yaml. Here also I used the same image and the text will be different now. That is front-end service. And I'm using the same port 5678. Let's save this YAML file now. Let's create the deployment using kubectl apply -f front-end deployment.yaml file. Deployment is created. Let's create a service now. kubectl expose deployment name that is front-end -deployment. Port I will use 80 and the target port that is container port 5678 and the name front-end service. Let's run this now. Service is created and if I run kubectl get service, I have one more service here, front-end service. Now I have two services. Let's get the ingress rule to route the traffic. I'm going to use path-based routing now. I want to route /API traffic to API service and /app traffic to front-end service. Let's get the YAML file vi ingress.yaml. We need AKMS. API version is I'm going to use networking.k8s. Then the kind will be ingress because I'm going to create ingress resource now. The metadata I have given name as my ingress. Now in spec I am going to create rules. Rules will be HTTP rules and I'm going to create a path-based routing. That's why I have to give the paths now. First path will be API path. Then I have to add the backend for this path. Backend will be API service. While creating the service, I have used 80 ports, so port will be 80. Then let's give one more path for front-end service. Here path is /app and path type is prefix and the backend is another service that is front-end service and the service port is here also 80. Let's save this YAML file now. Let's create the ingress using kubectl apply -f ingress.yaml. Ingress is created. Let's run kubectl get ingress. You can see my ingress is created now. Address is not yet available. It will take some time. Let's run this once again now. Still address is empty. Looks like some issue here. Let's delete this ingress now. Let's modify the ingress.yaml file. I think the YAML file is correct only, but I have not defined the class. That is the missing part, I think. I've added the ingress class that is Nginx so that it will use the Nginx controller that I installed earlier. Let's save this YAML file now. Let's apply this now. Ingress is created, but I got some warning here. This one is depreciated. I have to use this now. Let's run kubectl get ingress now. Kubectl get Ingress. Now I have the address here. You can ignore the warning I got earlier. Now let's touch this in my browser now using this external address. If I run only the address, I will get 404 not found. If I add /app, I get the message front end service here. Similarly, if I run API, I get the message API service here. So Ingress rule is working perfectly. So that's it for today. We have learned how to use Ingress today, and check out previous videos too. Subscribe and keep learning.